I got a notification. Broadcast is live.
Welcome everyone to the first episode of the Community CloudCast. My name is Eric Schups, also known as the SharePoint Cowboy, and I'm joined by my fellow hosts, Paul McCollum and Jason Himmelstein. Gentlemen, how are you today?
Doing well.
Who's he talking to? When did we become gentlemen? That one's new for me, Eric.
Benefit of the doubt, sir. Benefit of the doubt. A lot of doubt in this case.
Doing great.
Grading on a curve.
It's nice. It's my week, first week back from EY's shutdown. We were on break for a week. And the kids are gone off to camp for 3.5 weeks. So my office is quiet.
Wait, you have the house to yourself? What's that like?
My wife is still around as well, but not having a house full of children in the office is definitely a nice thing. It's different. I had forgotten what it was like.
And you, Mr. Paul, not on vacation?
No, not on vacation, but with appropriate planning. I also have a childless and quiet house.
Yeah, but that's true for you all the time.
If you need some advice on how that works, let me know after.
Too late, brother. Wait.
Yeah.
I can explain what went wrong.
Could have used that 22 years ago.
Yeah, no, nice. Have a little bit of a lull, so probably going to hop back into some exam certification studying. So
exams
that's always a good time. Salesforce.
Okay.
They have a new
talk more about.
User experience exam that I want to get under the belt and be able to talk about.
Cool.
Excellent. Well, we will cover that on future episodes.
Okay.
So speaking of, let's roll into a couple of things here, a little housekeeping to begin with. We'll be doing this broadcast every month on the third Thursday at 12 p.m. U.S. Central Time, so our friends in Europe don't have an excuse not to join. You can watch us on YouTube or on our Facebook page. Either one will carry the live stream, and you can enter questions or comments on either platform. We'll see them and respond to them appropriately, depending on the nature and the level of sarcasm in said comments.
More is
our
preferred.
audience.
Yes, more is preferred.
So we should probably, before we jump into a little bit of the content and cover our sponsors, we should probably set up for folks what we're doing here, because a lot of people obviously know Jason and I as primarily SharePoint-y folks or Power BI. In Jason's case, and Paul, who used to run the DFW SharePoint user group with me, also as a SharePoint-y person, but that's not really the point of this particular broadcast. Here we want to talk all things cloud. That'll probably be a heavy mixture of Azure and some other topics, but also we want to bring in things like Salesforce and AWS and other cloud platforms, and also cloud technologies in general. So that's why we called it the CloudCast and did not make it product specific. Gentlemen, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, from my perspective, I hear about the Microsoft-y stuff all the time. I'm kind of interested in hearing about other tech in the cloud-based community as well. That was part of the impetus for wanting to do this was, I do the Bifocal podcast with John White, and we do that partially to stay up on the Power BI tech. It forces us on a regular basis to be staying current. And so thought this would be a good opportunity to force myself to hear more and look into more outside of my normal space, and to look for some guests to hear about some of these things from as well. So that's part of why I thought this was a great idea.
Yep, agree. Same. The days of working in just one platform or one cloud were probably brief to begin with. Just about everywhere I work, somebody's doing the best of breed in functionality within one of the many clouds, and people are more and more using a multi-cloud infrastructure. And so having talks about what's happening at a per cloud level and cross-cloud functionality that's spinning up that may want to take a shot at the title for whichever piece and keep track of that so that we can make sure we're using best of breed, aware of best of breed, and when it's worthwhile to dip our toes outside of the clouds we're currently using and pick up functionality from additional ones.
Yeah, I think pertinent in the news over the course of the past week was the cancellation of the Jedi contract, right? That sort of talks to exactly what we're talking about here. Why did it get canceled? Well, there's a bigger story behind that, but one of our community friends, Seb Matthews, posted something out there about it. The fact that it was probably a bad idea in the first place to be single cloud, to have a sole cloud, just one, right? When I worked at Rackspace, we always talked about a multi-cloud solution, multi-cloud world, right? It wasn't just one place that you should be storing your stuff, because things go down from time to time. Azure's had outages, AWS has had outages, every platform has had them. How do you look into multiple spaces? And we were kind of having these conversations already. We were doing these conversations in more closed room spaces. We were like, how do we take this out and do this more of a community conversation? And here we are.
And if we actually had made the decision to just focus on that decision and that thing in the news, we could have called ourselves the Jedi Council. And I think that's a missed opportunity.
Had enough trouble figuring out a name. Leave it be, man. Let's go.
And yeah, Jedi Council.
No more discussion of names. Moving on. Moving on. So we should mention our sponsors, of course, Aptigent and the Power Tools product. We do have a kind of a cool thing coming up for that. We were contacted by the World Data Pipeline Championship to see if we would want to have our APIs involved with that. And it's a multi-day hackathon. We're putting up a $500 prize to the folks who can come up with the most creative use of our APIs as part of this hackathon. And we'll judge that at the end and see what creative stuff people come up with. So that's going to be pretty fun and interesting and unique, and something that we haven't done before. So you can get more information there by going to datapiplinewc.com. Sign up and register for that if you are so inclined, and start hacking away. Also, we should mention coming up in September is ShareCloud Summit. This is the annual, or what used to be annual, event that would happen every year at the Irving Convention Center. And obviously had to be skipped last year. It's back this year in September on the 28th, combined with Initech and the Women in Technology. And it's a great event. We usually get some excellent participation here from the local community in DFW, and some out-of-town folks come in for that as well. So it'll be a great event. Go to sharecloudsummit.com to register. Right, so moving on, the way that we're approaching the format for this is, from time to time, we'll bring you a guest speaker who will have a presentation, probably around 30 minutes, perhaps. So we don't have one for this inaugural episode, as we felt it was probably better for us to try and get things working for the first time out, rather than also trying to include a speaker here. But we will be bringing you some speakers in the future. And then each of us will cover our own segment of what we feel is relevant information, starting with Paul and his office hours segment. So, Paul, a couple of things that you have here to discuss. Take it away.
Excellent. Yeah, saw an article come out that was looking at the overall layout, and let me sample that image and put it into the slide, and the source is on there. Let me just throw that. That'll be useful information. All right. Can you next slide me, please?
Indeed, sir, I can.
So these are just some rough numbers just to understand where the breakdown is. It looks like there's quite a bit of competition in the other space to the big cats. AWS 32%, Azure 19%, with Google trailing with 7% among the big dogs. I don't see Heroku, which is the branded name for Salesforce's owned cloud space in there. It is probably taking up one of the others, even though it is actually technically hosted on AWS. So I'm not sure if that would fall into the AWS space or not, but that's a good breakdown that I hadn't seen before. Thought I would share that. And let's go next. There's a quick bit of news. I thought that would be good fodder for discussion anyway. Any thoughts or tips or any thoughts or questions about that from Jason or Eric? Does that match with what you've seen previously?
Let's go first.
Yeah, because we're focused in the Azure space, I'm not sure that we get enough exposure. It always surprises me a little bit that Amazon has more market share than Azure, considering how much easier Azure is to use for the end user and its overall integration points into Office 365. But obviously, there's a huge world outside of Microsoft that we don't get a lot of exposure to. I could tell you that having some experience now with the IBM platform, there are other cloud platforms not quite as mature, and there are certainly a lot of things I wish were more Azure-ish. A lot of times in AWS, I also wish things were more Azure-ish. But it'll be interesting to see. Jason has some discussion a little later on some of the announcements made at Inspire. It'll be interesting to see if or how that changes the overall makeup of that distribution with the things that Microsoft is doing.
Yeah, from my perspective, this breaks down pretty well across what I've seen. I'm not surprised that AWS is ahead of Azure. I think that they were, far out there, and from a web services perspective, from a just hosting perspective, they got out there really fast and early, and they still host the majority out there from a web perspective. And when you look at that gray box side of it, you've got everything else, right? GoDaddy's been out there for a long time, doing stuff. Rackspace was out there doing stuff. I mean, Oracle Cloud has their cloud. IBM, but each one of these has a chunk, right? But when you look at the majority, and if you think about what this was 2-3 years ago, AWS was triple, quadruple the Microsoft number. And now you're starting to see Microsoft really starting to creep that number up. Google Cloud, I think, was down around 3% in previous. So they've more than doubled, over not too long a period, as we're seeing so much more going to the cloud at this point because of this hybrid world that we're all living in, thanks to COVID. But it's definitely been something people, I was talking with a friend of mine who runs, IT for a local shop here in town. And when we had the big ice storm, he still had domain controllers on-prem for his Windows domains, and realized because of that, he had to get into a cloud solution instead of having his primary domain controller, the PC emulator being local and on-prem. Even though it's nice to have that for local authentication, they ran into big problems because of it. So they moved so much to the cloud as a result of that, because of that, the big freeze that we had where everybody lost power for so long here in San Antonio. It forced that situation. Not to mention, can't get into an office, can't go reboot servers and deal with anything that's happening in a lot of cases, thanks to the pandemic. So we're seeing these numbers grow from where they were, and it's impressive to see the growth, I think, that Microsoft has had in the space.
And of course, because we all know that a broken air conditioner in San Antonio could never bring down the cloud, right?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Back on topic.
So, and the AWS lead may have a little bit to do, and I'm not sure how these numbers came up, but the AWS consumption of cloud resources can be done at and started out being able to be done at a very granular level. You could put a simple Lambda out there and call a function, and that would be an AWS cloud resource where Microsoft focused on machine and server virtualization. So there were a lot more granular per web app needs that were able to be pulled from AWS hosting than, Microsoft now has kind of its SaaS provider. It's It's data, it's big data as a service, those kind of things that can be consumed on a per transaction basis, as opposed to I need a whole server with multiple CPUs, as opposed to I just need this function. And so all of those smaller uses, niche uses, and rapid fire uses without wanting to figure out what their IP address is are consumable at the AWS level. And Microsoft is just now leaning into being able to provide some of those services. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think also Amazon did a really good job of white boxing their cloud offerings to make it a almost behind the scenes unbranded offering for people like Salesforce, as you mentioned, to run their own cloud specific products on. And they did a really good job with that. And that's not something even to this day that Microsoft is actually all that good at doing. You can do it. And certainly we do it behind the scenes. Most of everything we do runs on Azure way on the back end, and you don't have to know that. You're right. There's some convergence coming there from an early lead that Amazon has in that space, and I think they've held on to that pretty well. But it's also impressive, not to skip too far ahead here, but like some of the Azure Arc announcements and things that Microsoft is doing. There's some pretty wicked cool tech there. Okay, so Paul, you had a couple of other things you wanted to mention.
Yeah. Going the same route. So the next link, the next news article, if you'll hit me on the next slide, please, after that one. This is interesting. So one of the things we've seen Microsoft do, and where they've been heading with the .NET Core, really seems to be around a containerized view of all of their services, which somewhat leans into what we were just talking about with AWS. It is interesting to see them pause on putting SQL Server into a container, and they may be leaning on their SQL Server as a service consumption of SQL, as opposed to being able to offer it as a container structure. One of the biggest pieces of news along that lines, and I'm hopefully speaking to everybody here that understands what I just babbled on about, that the container infrastructure, as opposed to spinning up a server, spinning up a simple container template to where you can deploy multiple servers with configuration added to them. You can create a template, spin them up at will in a container framework. Has been a direction that cloud and hosting has been heading. So as opposed to spinning up virtual machines, you're just actually deploying containers into a container orchestration space, Kubernetes being the first one that pops to mind. So Core has been planning, .NET Core has been planning to run just on that, as opposed to or that's been one of the reshapings that .NET Core over the original .NET infrastructure, that it was favoring container space. Salesforce is talking about, or has entered into partnership with Microsoft to create a deployable Salesforce container so that you can spin up an Azure container instance that's running Salesforce inside of your private Azure space. So this is it's the product line inside of Salesforce is called Hyperforce. And so that's been a big nod to the companies that can't go shared service cloud, can't go shared hardware, and need to have what Azure's level of breakdown is in there. So this was an interesting thing to see, that SQL Server wasn't going to continue to play in that space, and looking for if that momentum is slowing down for containerization on their side, or if they've got another solution in the wings for that.
Jason, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I really don't have an opinion on that one. I'm not playing in that space myself these days, so I'll leave it to you, Eric.
Yeah, my quick take on that is that your initial assumption is the correct one, that they're pointing it more towards their managed service and their service instance of SQL rather than a containerized version. But I don't have any inside knowledge on that. Maybe we can get some SQL folks on here in a future episode, and they can run that down for us.
Yeah, everything I do is Azure SQL these days. I don't bother with the containers. So.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing where their containerization investment, which seemed to be heavy initially, is going, and what this is kind of a sign of. Because like I said, if Salesforce has made major announcements like last year that they were going to be able to participate in this containerization world, so it would seem odd for Microsoft to be backing away from it.
All right, so a couple more things. Let's move through these quickly. You got a couple more links here.
Gotcha. Yeah. So there was also a big announcement between Salesforce and AWS, and I'll just quickly talk about that, where Salesforce can consume AWS resources as if they are directly available as a hosted web service within Salesforce. So less hopping, less configuration. Basically, it's pulling the data source. It's skipping a couple of the config steps normally required to consume AWS resources from a third party. And then the last one is AWS is entering into a bit of a workflow, a low-code workflow tool, which will now compete. Salesforce has a big one. I think even Google Gears they were pushing a visual flow design system, but I think they shuttered that a while back. I need to go check up on where they're at. And then, of course, Microsoft Flows also competing there, and a lot of the Nintex and K2s of the world in that space. So it'll be interesting to see if we have a big war of the flows. And so I'll keep track of that.
Yeah, we actually looked into this about 6 months ago. Well, maybe it was about this time last year, so maybe closer to a year ago. And Amazon, not known for their user interface story. The early bits we saw were pretty simplistic, and there was no external integration that we could find. Obviously, we want to be, when I say we, I mean my company Aptogen, we want to be on that platform with our power tools to plug into that, but there seemed to be a disjointed story. So that's worth probably revisiting to see if that has improved or how much it has improved.
Cool. Well, that is all the cross-cloud, partly cloudy news that I have. So thank you.
Awesome. And next up,
I'm disappointed that the Virgin Galactic launch through the clouds didn't make it in there. Seeing as there's definitely been the whole, Bezos versus Branson versus, a crazy Tesla guy, whatever. Just thought that was worthy of mention, but not. I guess maybe it'll make future episodes.
You were responsible for that slide, sir.
Me?
Yeah, billionaire poker is not something I had on my topic for this.
That's true. So, all right. Well, I'll ramble on about a couple of things. Some of these are new, some of them are not. The Power BI premium per user licensing to me is the biggest thing that's happened in the Power BI space this calendar year. So I think it's worth mentioning. All the good stuff in Power BI seems to be going into the premium workloads. And, now for the first time, we're actually able to leverage that on a per user basis instead of having to spend gobs and gobs of money to have a capacity behind it. So the premium per user licensing is actually $10 more per user than the pro license is, which is a $10 license. So you're talking about $20 per user per month for accessing these really cool features, all the hottest AI features that you're going to find in the space, all of the cool paginated stuff that I'm going to talk about next. All that stuff is all thanks to the premium per user license. This and Keith has a really good question about War of the Flows. In this particular space, I'm talking about Power BI specifically, not the Power Platform as a whole. As fun as it is, even though Power BI is called a part of the Power Platform, it's oftentimes viewed separately. So there's in this last link that I have up there, I'm not going to bother clicking on it. We'll put that into the show notes maybe. Microsoft this week announced the Wave 2 plan for the 2021 release cycle. There's lots of great stuff in here around Power BI, but there's also all the Power Apps and Flow things as well. Just putting it out there. If you're interested in what's coming next, this is how Microsoft is communicating with us about what they are building into these platforms. You can go in and see what they're planning on putting into public preview versus general availability. Now, it's not everything, but it's a good high-level list. And they've broken it down into premium at this point, and then pro, and some other experiences as well. When on the Power BI side, there have been big licensing changes around the Power Apps side of things. I think they basically cut the pricing in half, is the way that I was reading it from a general populist perspective. When it comes to cost and Microsoft licensing, as if you're going out and buying a single license, you're going to pay whatever's on the website, but most people have some form of discounted pricing. So I always like to say list price, sort of like buying a car. If you're paying list, it means that you're not buying it right, probably, at least in the corporate world. And just to be more interesting, to throw this in an out of order way, because we prepped really hard on this stuff. So all of my links were meant to go directly in order, and there was a flow to it. I'm going to talk about the middle bullet here, which is the paginated report visual in Power BI. Now, just to give you a breakdown of what is a paginated report, there's this thing called SQL Server Reporting Services that's been around for just about ever in the SQL Server platform. And it's been over a year now that got moved from just being an on-prem product to being a part of the Power BI service. And it's referred to as paginated reports. So when you hear paginated reports, think old school SSRS. And for those in the SharePoint world, we had that capability in SharePoint where you had all the embedded libraries and all of that type of stuff. Now, all of this becomes visualizable. Yes, I like to make up words in the cloud service over in Power BI, right? So you can visualize paginated reports in the Power BI service. And before this month's release in the service, what we had was you had to go into it separately, right? So you had your Power BI report, which was referred to as an interactive report, and you had all the cool visuals, and you could clicky into it and do all sorts of cool stuff. But then in order to get to this paginated world, you had to jump out and go to a different experience. Well, now we actually can embed a paginated report directly in a Power BI report and visualize it properly. And I wrote a white paper. Eric will tell you, and Paul, you don't know me quite as well, but Eric will tell you, I'm horribly lazy. I don't write white papers. I don't like writing blog posts. I like to come on things like this and just talk for a while.
Yeah, he told me.
So, the fact that I wrote a white paper about something means
that is saying something. I got it.
Saying something. And just I'm going to share my screen for just 1 second, if that's okay, Eric, because I actually have it fired up over here. Let's see if it lets me pick which screen I can. Look at that. I'm a giant geek when it comes to data, and I've been, I go to Orange Theory Fitness. So this is my my geeky fun little tracker. And right here, you can see this paginated report is showing up in my Power BI report. And if I change the filter on the page, which is actually a slicer, you'll see it actually does show up properly. And if I say, I just want to see Wednesdays in June, it will do that as well. This guy's a little bit slower than the rest of the report. There's actually a way that you can make it where you don't change that until you're ready. But just wanted to show it off. This is really powerful because I can come in here and I can export the data. Instead of seeing the entire data set, it's going to be exactly what I want. And in my world, I work for EY in the tax practice. Everybody always wants to be able to take the data out of these reports and move it downstream into something else. So we now have the ability to get to that simply by coming in here and saying, well, let me export it to an XLSX file, and then I can ingress that, or a CSV file, I can ingress that into a downstream system. So in my view, it's a really powerful set of tooling, and I can do a lot with it. You do have to craft that RDL, that that SRS style report, that paginated report, so it becomes visualizable that way. But it works really, really well. So if you want to jump back to the deck, that's all the Power BI news I wanted to cover off for today. I don't know if you guys had any comments about that. I really didn't take a breath in that section, so I'll let you guys comment if you have anything.
Well, I think that's certainly a nifty feature. You said those 3 letters, though, that may give me the quivers, which is RDL.
Yep.
Yes, can't seem to get away from those.
No, but they're really powerful and, give you that capability of export. And, not everybody needs something that's printable, but a lot of people need something that is exportable and transportable. And we do so much transformation of the data, to be able to do that becomes a very powerful thing.
Agreed.
So, all right, a couple of other bits of news that I took away from this week. Number one, and again, I'm going to jump to the bottom first because I think we're going to talk more about the top one. Windows 11. So I'm technically jumping into the middle one. I installed it for the first time on one of my dev machines this week. The experience was seamless. It's actually kind of nice. I think that they're going to end up with some problems from the Mac OS side of things because it kind of has that similar feel. But as soon as I moved the start menu back to the left, because that's where I've been expecting it for my entire Windows career, I got really comfy with it pretty quick. I'm in the dev channel as opposed to the beta channel, so I'm getting lots of updates. It does feel a little bit slower than I'm used to, but it's a dev build of Windows 11. So if you're interested, definitely go out there, check it out. You do need to join the Insiders program. You need to link up in a Microsoft ID, either a corporate one or a personal one, and you can go ahead and get the Windows 11 dev channel or beta channel trial right now out there very easily. And it took, I'll say, I hardwired into my network. It only took about an hour to download and install, get the update. Everything was there that I had before. It was a nice seamless upgrade on Windows 11. I'll talk about the last one next, which is the Microsoft's new 3D emojis. My kids are very excited about this because
yay, Clippy, yay!
And we actually see Clippy coming back to life in Office as a result of this. I'm a Clippy fan, always have been. I have a Clippy T-shirt. I wear around the house occasionally. He poor guy got a bad rap, but it's cool that they're bringing some interesting emojis back, and it's following along with where the world is going. And lastly, the big announcement that I saw, because I went through the big book of news for Inspire, didn't really see much other than the big announcement around Windows 365. Completely new concept, folks. Brand new thing. Never been done before in the history of computing.
Nope.
Except for the fact that Azure Virtual Desktop is actually pretty much the same thing. There are a couple of links here that I find very useful. First one is a comparison between Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop. I was chatting with friend of ours, Scott Hogue, this morning, who actually works at Microsoft, and he pointed me to this link because I was making the comment. I was like, I haven't seen anybody break this down really well. And he's like, here, instantly. Man always has a good link at his fingertips. Hopefully we'll be able to get him on the show at some point. But this really does a good job of breaking down what the differences are between Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop. And the takeaway that I had from this article was something I was telling some folks at EY this morning. It's like, for me, this translates into, what is the Windows Virtual Desktop? What is Cloud PC, as they're trying to call it? It's fewer options for people to not have to worry about regarding Azure Virtual Desktop. It's making it simpler, making it easier, and hopefully giving a little bit more love to some of the consumer side stuff, like being able to plug in an external webcam or mics and things like that, because that's going to be a need for people if you're streaming a PC and needing to be able to plug that in, which is a little bit harder in the Azure Virtual Desktop world today. And then there was a first reveal on some pricing. I've only seen one price point here. I see it two different ways in this article. So take a look. The Verge is always a fun site to go geek out on. They have a specific area for Microsoft as well as AWS and lots of others as well. So if you're looking for good news, that's usually a place I like to go. They do have a price point out there. I'm not going to say what it is because it'll date this really quickly. Hopefully, I know August 2nd is when they're supposed to be making the big announcements around all of those things and making this publicly available. So, that's before we'll get back together. So maybe we'll talk about what that price point looks like at that point. Those are my big news points. Let you guys comment at this point.
Well, it was inevitable that they were going to do this. I'm not sure that anyone has learned the lessons of the past here. As you say, there are always integration issues. There's management issues. At the end of the day, managed desktops end up being an IT function to reduce the amount of PC support that has to be done. They're talking about streaming to any device, including mobile devices and iOS and Android and whatnot. Well, that's a different user experience, right? You have all the external hardware integration that has to be dealt with. Again, inevitable probably, but I'm not sure that this has the kind of traction that they may think it has. I mean, we all remember the network as a computer, and that was Oracle's whole push from 2005 or earlier. Mm-hmm. And with netbooks and all that sort of thing. And this concept of we're going to virtualize your desktop worked with green screens and it worked with net terminals because you were using them for specific tasks to do a few very specific things. How well does it work with a Swiss Army knife of a desktop operating system? Man, I just don't know.
Yeah, the thing that's going to be really interesting for me about this, and the thing that makes the Windows 365 thing at all attractive over Azure Virtual Desktop is a flat fee pricing structure. If in fact they're able to get to a flat fee pricing structure where I can pay, X dollars per month for 8 cores, 64 gigs of RAM, and an SSD speed hard drive that's always on, I don't have to worry about spinning it down, spinning it back up in order to not get charged, and I'm paying a flat fee per month, that becomes a little bit more attractive because then I'm fine with just letting it run and coming back, because that's been the comment that I've read is, and Jared Spataro did an interview with, I think it was CNBC that I was watching this morning, where he talks about, just come back to it and your windows are all open. Well, the only way that works is if this thing stays on all the time, and maybe they drop resources away in the background or something, but I don't want to have to think about spin down, spin up timing. I want to go hit the, whether it's website or app or whatever it is, have it come up in 2 to 3 seconds, and I'm back to where I was. That would make that a very attractive thing for me and not have to worry about the price point. I'd be willing to pay a couple $100, or $150 a month for a really beefy cloud VM that I don't have to think about anymore for a price point, as opposed to, let me get the Azure calculator out and figure out what's my storage costing me, how much my CPU and RAM. Well, I need to shut it down at 6 p.m. Well, hang on, and all of those things. I need to spin it back up. That's where things become dicey for me from a price point. That would make the Windows 365 a really attractive solution.
Paul?
Yeah, no, so to me, it's a question around virtual privacy machines. When you're spinning up an operating system on, or view to an operating system inside of a client, even though, because it gives you so many other options to protect the data that the person is working with. My laptop is my corporate laptop, and it is locked down because on my laptop, I am accessing corporate resources. If I plug in a hard drive, if I manage to plug into a hard drive, I am almost directly connected to my corporate data and can copy it down, unless they cripple my computer even more by locking down USB ports. And then you're really impacting the way people work on their PCs. And I see a lot of the stuff. I saw a lot of the drive for iPhones and Macs. It was to get away from the lockdowns that were capable on an AD slaved PC, an Active Directory. Once you're part of an Active Directory, you can turn all this stuff off, and the IT protectors, the security team, hadn't figured out how to do that on iPhone, hadn't figured out how to do that on on Apple. And so people ended up breaking away because they were trying to use their personal computers for personal things. And this lets you do Windows locked down on an unlocked computer. I think that's going to be a huge hit if they actually start to roll it out and can put that out there. You know, if we can make but you have to change the statement. Yeah, use your personal PC to do work. But here's how you're going to do it. Feel free, buy your own laptop, whatever version, Chromebook, and then surf to or launch the image that is AD locked down, can't do anything, and we have really good control over the virtual physical boundary. I think that'll be huge, could be huge long term in this personal computer revolution, especially when we're all at home. And I don't want to have an extra PC with an extra set of monitors hanging around. I want to just use one, and when I switch over to work stuff, I want that to be seamless. So I think that could be a big driver for this. It'll take some culture adoption to get there, a couple of good revs, but I've been playing with VPNs that do stuff like this since 2000. I really thought that they were gonna. I keep expecting them to launch, and take off, and I keep being wrong. So we'll see if one day this actually comes up, or if there's enough back-end support to make this easy to do and just stream it out to people and have that locked down. That this time, the 12th iteration of this. God, I think there was a specific version of Windows Server that was in 2008 or 9 that you could hook up a USB keyboard and monitor. I think multi-point server, Microsoft Windows multi-point server, was a version of server that was supposed to do thin client Windows hosting off of USB connections. The trick was you just ran a long USB cable to this server, and you could give people thin client desktops off of one machine. So it's been around for a while and multiple crazy instances. Hopefully this will kick off. Maybe Clippy is just enough to put it over the top.
Well, maybe. I think my closing thoughts on this are, I see 3 potential spaces, and they're the same 3 potential spaces that have always been there for virtualized desktops: healthcare, education, and the enterprise. In those arenas where you can control all that, it solves the BYOD problem. As Jason says, it solves the personal device privacy problem, especially now that more people are working from home and mobile. Big issue in healthcare, obviously. And in education, it gives you a fully equipped desktop for delivery to the desktop, which is important because you've got a lot of kids coming out of school used to working on tablets. Now they have to work on a quote unquote real computer for the first time. It's a different experience for them. I think in typical Microsoft fashion, and this is just my concern here, is that they are aiming for the consumer and they're going to miss it wide, as they usually do, when their target audience should be right in the enterprise where this sort of thing makes sense. All right. So moving on, I think there will be lots more discussion around that particular topic going forward as well. So into my little portion here, I thought I'd talk a bit about something that's getting a lot of mentions lately. Our friend Addis has been all over this one, and that is the Azure Maps functionality, or as it is more broadly known now, Azure Geospatial Services, which is a big mouthful, so we'll call it Azure Maps. This is a cool set of endpoints that they're providing in Azure now to give you, to be honest, the same type of functionality that you could get from other services, and in fact consumes, and this is a very interesting piece, Azure Maps actually consumes another API to deliver this to you. Much of the data is coming from the AccuWeather services on the back end. So you're calling a REST API that then is calling another REST API. And to make it even more complex and add more hops to it, if you consume it in our Power Tools product, which we're about to release an update that includes Azure Maps functionality, I'll demo here in a second, then you're calling a REST API that calls a REST API that calls a REST API. So you have this chain of API. But in honesty, that's exactly what we talk about when we talk about the API economy. When I have my Aptogen hat on and we're talking about API economy, this is what we're talking about. Putting together applications that you don't know where that backend data is coming from, and you don't even care. You're grabbing multiple API services. And I think it's actually really cool that Microsoft is, rather than trying to build it themselves, they are taking best of breed services and exposing them through Azure. And then what we do is we make that very easy for you to put that into, say, Power Platform or Salesforce or another Nintex, for example, as a set of connectors, where Microsoft stops short of doing that and making those integration points available. So I thought I'd show a quick little demo of Azure Maps in action. There's actually some pretty cool endpoints to this. So let's start with sort of the standard use case, which is I'm going to render a map image. And I'm going to show you a very basic example because that's really our target here. But this is calling our Power Tools services that I'm running here in my dev environment that then's calling into Azure on the back end. And if you look at the documentation for the APIs, which is very good, they tell you all the ways that you can call these particular endpoints and how you would do that. So if you're doing, for example, the render APIs, you can get a map tile, and here's an example of getting a map tile giving you coordinates. Now, interestingly enough, and I'm not sure why they did this, but Microsoft has two different sets of endpoints to get to the data. So first, you have to get the latitude and longitude coordinates. All of these API runs off lat long. So you first have to call a coordinates API in order to get information. If you wanted to, say, pass in an address or a locale, could be a specific address, could be Fort Worth, Texas, or San Antonio, or it could even be the name of a locality or a landmark or whatnot. It uses search functionality on the back end to then return a set of possible matching coordinates. Well, that means you're making two calls. So what we did is we combined those into one, where all you have to do is pass in a locale. We'll do the two steps for you and return it back. But if you look through the API documentation, especially for the REST API, it tells you exactly what it is you need to pass in to get that information, whether you want to do it with your OAuth call or whether you want to use an API key or whatnot. So the way this works in practice is I can pass in a source. In this case, I'll use a specific address, give it a zoom level that I want at height and width of the resulting image. And that will send back to me a image tile that I could then use, say, in a Power App or in a Flow or a mobile application that I'm building. And you can scale that up or down and zoom it in or out. And I'm just giving some of the possible pieces here. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this. They also have a full-on traffic API. They have an API that for mapping, you can get surrounding tiles as well as the particular center tile that you're looking for, and tell it how to center. So there's a bunch of cool stuff that you can do with that one. And there's also some other nifty APIs that are kind of fun. Here's the coordinates. This is to get your latitude and longitude. So if you send it in a particular address, you can get lat and long, or you can give it a locale to get something generic, like, so we can say Fort Worth, Texas, and it'll try and do a fuzzy search and send back, and there you get a lat and long for centered in Fort Worth. So it gives you a lot of flexibility as to how you're describing where you want those endpoints to be. And then I started having a little bit of fun with the different capabilities that they offer. Traffic, for example, has a bunch of capabilities. You can do routes. You can pass in route information to get weather along the route that you're traveling. So you give it all of the endpoints that you're traversing in a chain of your travel. And it will send back not only tile images for each of those, but send back weather conditions on those. So you'll know what the weather is going to be along your journey as you traverse it. Here's an example, just real quick, of getting some weather. Let me jump back to IP location. So I'm going to get the daily weather forecast for this location using imperial units for a duration of 5 days. I'll send that off. and it'll spit back to me a bunch of good information like hours of sunlight, air quality, level of clouds, precipitation, probability of snow and ice, thunderstorms, etc. And it'll give it to you for each one of these dates in a JSON object here that it returns. So you can set that up to 10 days out that you can get results for. There are a couple of different tiers here. There's an S0 tier, which is the basic tier, and an S1 tier. The S1 tier has some additional capabilities. You can get up to 30 days of data, for example, and it tells you that in the documentation as to what each one of the tiers does for you. And you can even do some fun stuff here, like they have a activity forecast API. So if I send in my location and give it an activity or set of activities, it'll say, okay, conditions are excellent for flying. And it gives you this little blurb that you can, something you would use on a tile or an icon or something inside of an app. What is the air quality or the weather quality like? Well, it's good or it's poor. Conditions. I'm not sure how you get poor conditions for indoor activities exactly, but that's what it's saying.
I think
in Redmond today.
That it's really nice outside, and therefore it should be something you go outside for. Yeah,
because it's an excellent day for outdoor running, but poor conditions for indoor. Jogging, hiking, bicycling, golf, tennis, skateboarding, outdoor concerts. Kite flying, because we know we're looking for those kite flying conditions. That's really important. Sailing.
My wife tells me to go fly a kite regularly. So that's
and most importantly, the one Paul is most interested in is stargazing forecasts. So he can plan out his evening laying in the grass, looking at the sky, and know whether it's going to rain on him or not.
You laugh, but having built a retail information system that is very curious about if I've got stores located next to parks, if it is heavy park activity, I want to know so I can go stock up on bottled water, fireworks, stuff like that. If it's stargazing, that all of that crazy detail benefits somebody and lets somebody amp up or personalize a shopping experience based on area and weather. So those are huge. It does.
At first, I started playing with thought, okay, this is a little cheeky. But as I got into it, I thought, this could be very valuable for you to use in different types of applications. And you can even send in, there's categories. You can say outdoor activities or outdoor activity. And send that off, and it'll come back with just the things related to outdoor activities. So you can narrow that down through the API. And one other one.
Activity forecast is really important as well. I saw that one there. That's actually that's kind of useful.
It is. It actually is. And hopefully people will use it. It'll be coming out to you in Power Platform hopefully next month as I get these rolled out if you want to try it in our Power Tools product. And of course, you can always go and build your own connector. And if you don't know how to do that, it just so happened I have some presentations up on my SlideShare that will help you learn how to build custom connectors. And you can build your own. And one final one that I found this interesting, not so much for what it does, but for what it doesn't do. So this is an IP source location API. And if you send it in a source, it will spit back some information. But interestingly, it only gives you the country. It will not give you any more granular detail than that. Now, I'm not sure why that is. I'd be curious to hear what you guys think about that. But I thought that was kind of intriguing as I was playing with it, that we obviously have the technology. There's a whole lot of sites that do that. What is my IP address and whatnot? And there's even other API providers that allow you to get more granular. Why are they limiting it to just the country that you're coming from?
I think it's probably to keep people like Mark Rackley from getting too obsessive about, who's giving him negative comments on his blog. Could that?
But all his come from Russia, so what more does he need to know?
Well, yeah,
he doesn't know the difference between Stalingrad and Leningrad.
True. They both have bacon, so no. I don't know. That's an interesting one. I haven't given it any thought. This is the first time hearing about it, so I have to give that some thought.
Yeah. So obviously the use case is to identify your visitors to a website or an app or whatnot, and apply localization. Got it. But
do you think there's a GDPR component? So if you've not accepted a GDPR, the CCPA, if I come to your website, if I have not accepted your terms about what data you can collect from me, then that might be as far as you get. There may be another flag that you have to throw at this point to say user has accepted and therefore can allow that to come through.
Well, there's nothing in the API for that. Okay. So anyway, that was just a quick mention of Azure Maps and what it can do. It's been getting some traction lately, I think for good reason. It's a great set of endpoints that I think they'll expand over time. Right, so believe it or not, it has been nearly an hour on our broadcast, as most of those folks who know us are well familiar with us. If you give us a minute, we'll take 10. So we're trying to keep this on time every month. Want to once again thank our sponsors, Aptigent and ShareCloud Summit, for making this possible. Gentlemen, final thoughts on today's episode before we wrap it up.
I'm amazed we finally got this off the ground. We've only been talking about it for 6 months. So good on you guys. Thanks for doing this. And I'm looking forward to doing this on a more regular basis and hearing more of this cool news. Yeah,
this was surprisingly interesting content.
I told people they might be shocked and actually learn something. It could happen.
Yeah. All right.
So don't forget, everyone, we'll be coming to you the third Thursday of every month. You can go to our YouTube channel and join us live if you want to ask questions and interact. And we do encourage interaction. If you would like to contact us afterwards, obviously leave a comment on our Facebook page or on the YouTube video, which you can access once this is posted, which usually happens within a few minutes of it being wrapped up. I want to, of course, thank my co-hosts, Paul McCollum and Jason Himmelstein, for joining me this month. We will be back with you next month for episode number 2 of the Community CloudCast. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.